And we're live. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's our Blockchain for Europe webinar series. And today we have a special day. It's International Women's Day. It should be like that every day, but they put it on the 8th of March. But we can celebrate it more often. However, here we are today with our dream team, some of our dream team blockchain ladies from all around the world. We have Helen Kopman, from representing the European Commission. We have Sheila Warren from WEF. We have Caroline Malcolm from OECD, and we're just going to discuss the topic of blockchain, a little bit about how women can participate, why it's important to have more participation, diversity, and inclusion, and really the topic should be also about the current policies, what's going on in the blockchain space. There's so much going on, innovation going full speed, and so yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about. But I would like to have my panelists today to introduce themselves, explain a little bit about what they're doing, what they're working on, and so here we go. Helen, floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, and I can't say how thrilled I am to be here today with you and with Carol and Sheila, and hopefully also Eva Kylie will join. Really, as you say, it's a dream team of women. I'm really impressed by all of you, and I'm really happy to be here today. I guess you want just a short introduction. I mean, so I'm working in the European Commission in the space of digital innovation and blockchain, and how I ended up here is quite, it's not so winding road. It's quite straightforward. I'm an engineer, and I working with system integration and developing services and products. Both on the private side and on the public side, and lately now about 15 years in the European Commission, working in really all the time in the space of innovation, looking at new developments, new technology, and trying to help technology to come to the market and to be really to the benefit of citizens, working both on policy and programs. So how I got around to blockchain is also pretty much part of the work I had. So in digital innovation, we look at emerging technology, and this was extremely interesting when it popped up around 2010, for me at least, and I started observing it and developing how it was developing. And around 2013-14, we started looking into how we could promote perhaps this extremely interesting emerging technology in our research program. So we developed, actually together, we co-created within the services a prize that we called Blockchain for Social Good. And it was quite a few years ago, and it took a long time before it was materializing. But last year, about 6 prize winners were nominated for this, and of course there are other things that happened in between, but that's sort of how I ended up here.
Excellent, thank you. What about you, Sheila?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So I'm Sheila Warren. I am the head of data blockchain digital assets, the World Economic Forum. And so I head up the teams that focus in the forum on this technology and on crypto and kind of related topics, and also all of our data policy work. And I recently took over as deputy head of our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is our based in San Francisco HQ'd part of the organization that focuses technologies, how they intersect, and the policy and governance mechanisms that we help develop and co-create with our community of stakeholders from all across different sectors and different geographies in order to ensure that we are mitigating risk where we can and really accelerating benefit of blockchain technology and related technologies. So we focus a lot in our work on policy development. So in sharp contrast to Helen, we are not actually pushing out proof of concept. We're not working on the software side of things or the code-based side of things. We're looking really in the policy application space. And so part of what our fundamental hypothesis is which is observable phenomenon, is that, you can have all the technical innovation in the world, but if it's not couched within policy that is going to spur that innovation, but also provide appropriate protections for experimentation and to make sure it's not exploitative, for example, it's challenging. I also see a big part of my role at the forum as normalizing this technology and normalizing crypto and digital currencies as a general matter. So it doesn't necessarily mean mainstreaming it. I think that every project has to be fit for purpose, and the purpose is defined by those who are building. But I think it's really important that we flag repeatedly, and we've been doing this for the 3.5 years I've been in charge of this team, or founded the team, we really kind of show that it's not crazy to use this technology. It's not crazy to own crypto. These are very normal things. They're going to become more and more normal to do. And really the assessment should be one that is more practical in orientation. So I like to think, that we've had some outsized impact maybe on the space in terms of bringing together communities that weren't otherwise talking to each other, helping really make the case that the world needs this technology, that it's really important, and the opportunities it presents are really unmatched in anything else that we're seeing today.
Absolutely. No, very, very good. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to you telling us a little bit more about the practical examples. But first, let me just introduce let me have Caroline introduce herself. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Really a pleasure to be here, Maria. Thank you. And it's great to be amongst Helen and Sheila as well. And nice to see there's kind of a big variety of backgrounds. And I think we can hope to talk a little bit about that in terms of kind of all the different ways that you can get involved in this sector. I mean, I think there's some specificities to blockchain, but also to tech in general. But it's really great to see women from kind of all sorts of backgrounds being involved. My personal background is I'm actually a lawyer by training, and actually tax law of all things. And it was in fact through tax that I got involved in first crypto and then into blockchain more broadly. And really that was starting to look but over 3 years ago now, in fact, at the questions relating to tax treatment of crypto. We'd just gone through a kind of a big boom, or what was then a big boom in prices in crypto, certainly shadowed by what we've seen in the last 6 months. And, there were a lot of questions being asked about how do people report their gains, what do they do with losses and so forth in this space. And so really starting to work with countries within the OECD, but also beyond, to think about, what is the appropriate tax treatment of some of these, developments that we're seeing in the crypto space. From there, really began to look at the use of blockchain more broadly and some other emerging technologies as well, but with a focus on a blockchain in terms of tax administration. So the sort of tax part of government service delivery. And from there, founded and for the last couple of years been heading the OECD's Blockchain Policy Center. And really what was the goal when the center was created was to establish sort of a global reference point on the policy issues that arise from the technology and its applications. And you've sort of seen, I think, in terms of the breadth of the work that has come out of the center in the last couple of years, just kind of how broad those policy implications are, and really kind of challenging at a fundamental level. When we think about policy and regulation, often people have talked about, regulation or policy is sort of tech neutral, and then we go back and look at some of that legislation through the eyes of kind of DLT and the very different way that DLT sort of exists in the world and operates. And we began to realize, in fact, that there are some ways in which what we thought of as tech neutral just really doesn't harmonize well with the way that the DLT works. And I think that's really kind of been, a fundamental learning in terms of policymakers in this space, that there are some ways in which old rules can fit into the new system, DLT systems, but there are other ways where they raise completely new issues which aren't taken into account in current kind of thinking. And I think that's what we've really tried to explore. What are some of those issues? And really, I think, I'm not going to dive in right now to the breadth of work that we've done, but the most exciting thing I really want to mention that the team is bringing forward now is a piece relating to sort of high-level principles on blockchain, responsible blockchain innovation and adoption. We're looking forward to launch a public consultation on that in the next few weeks. And it picks up a little bit some of the issues that the WEF has talked about in some of the work they've done in the principles in the last couple of years, and takes forward some other issues sort of which are more come to the fore in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. But that was my background, how I got here, and some of the things we've been working on.
No, that sounds really interesting. And I think, probably very challenging, right? How do you harmonize across all these different countries around the globe? So what are some of the challenges, and how do you guys overcome them? How do you bring everybody together? I think this is one of the themes as well. We're bringing everybody to the table, have a diversity of opinions, views, and making it still tech neutral. So how do you guys deal with that?
And
Caroline,
I think that's one of the biggest
Sheila.
challenges, right? Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges. And I think it's just something historically that the forum has done for 50 years, is sort of look across different stakeholder boundaries, right? And bring together the public sector, the private sector, civil society, academia, and really try to ensure that we are finding common ground. We're finding the common ground where it exists. And so Caroline mentioned our Presidio Principles, and that was an example where we had a global blockchain council deliberately selected experts from around the world who had dramatically different points of view, often clashed very strongly in terms of what they thought was the next phase or direction, or where things ought to be moving. And even in our first meeting, it was very clear that there really was no ethical framework for how to go about building applications in the space. And so we very quickly realized that rolling out something like what became the Presidio Principles would be high value, regardless of your orientation of the space. And so it was a way of channeling some of that passionate energy and putting it into something that had more universal applicability. That's one example, right? I think there are other examples where we try to point out that, as I use this expression a lot, it's not a cage match in our view. So it's not like which of these protocols is going to defeat the other protocol, and which type of digital currency is going to be the one that's the most important. We just find that I personally find this to just be kind of a funny at times, entertaining conversation, but there's room here, right? Like we are early, still relatively early in the building of this ecosystem and in the innovation. And so I think it behooves us to be pretty thoughtful about what projects we're trying to kill off, on the vine, right? Before they've had a chance to maybe even get air. So that's something else that I think is an important perspective. And we can provide that very credibly, as of course, others on this call can, because we don't have skin in the game. Again, we're not promoting a particular protocol or a particular project or a particular government's approach to it. We are truly Swiss neutral, in our approach to it. So I think that helps. And frankly, I think if you don't, come from that kind of perspective, it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to get people from, let's call it, across the aisle, whether it's like Bitcoin folks and Ethereum folks, to really listen to each other. It can be quite challenging.
It is. I can confirm firsthand. It is. So, Helen, maybe if you can tell us what the European Commission, some of the initiatives that you guys are working on to support the European blockchain ecosystem.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's so incredibly important to get people together, and this is really what we have been trying to do with our European blockchain strategy that we've been developing last years. And one of the first things we do, and that we did actually in cooperation with the European Parliament, is to set up a EU blockchain observatory forum, which is really bringing experts together, sharing their knowledge about different topics around blockchain and different deep dives in sustainability, how you use it in different sectors, the regulatory framework, standardization, how it's applicable to different services and so on. And putting out reports together, and that it's public goods, so we put them out on the website and have workshops around that. And then, of course, extremely important, what we also try to do is to support the development of the ecosystem in terms of investment. So we do fund startups in the space, and we have set up a specific fund which combines artificial intelligence and blockchain to support growing startups in the space. And it has been extremely successful, actually. The last 2 years that it's been running, it's been now leveraged up to 700 million euros from an initial cornerstone investment of 100 million that we put in from the EU. But then, of course, in research and innovation as well, we support projects for developing new energy efficiency, scalability, interoperability around blockchain. I should also, of course, mention that the partnerships that we are putting together, both with policymakers in member states and the industry. So with the industry. We have an international association of trusted blockchain applications, which actually is a global association, bringing together industry, both big and small players here, to discuss together in different working groups how you can promote and remove regulatory barriers for blockchain rollout across the globe. Is extremely important for us when we also develop regulation in the space, that we have a partner like this in the industry that we can share and discuss with. And then we also have the partnership with the member states in the EU and Norway and Liechtenstein, and the European Blockchain Partnership, where we together develop and roll out, deploy a first of its kind network with physical nodes across all these countries to support cross-border services in areas like certification and sharing of diplomas. If you would work in another country, or we also have a digital identity supported there, self-sovereign digital identity that would like to, which would actually underpin many other services. And this is extremely important. The network now is actually in a quite critical stage of going live this coming month, and with its first set of 4 use cases in, as I said, diplomas, digital identity, but also registry, sharing of registry across borders. So it's extremely interesting development right now.
It sounds like it. I actually heard a little bit about the diplomas as well from some organizations in Switzerland that they've launched it and they're promoting it now with their students. I'm really looking forward to that. I think that would be very, very useful to have across Europe and obviously outside of Europe as well. So what are maybe some of the challenges? So this is all like sounds really great, and it just sounds like, yeah, we just get on. But what are some of the challenges that you guys maybe have seen or face, Helen?
Of course, I think that as often when you work with technology, it's not so much the technology that is the challenge. Actually, it's much more the soft issues around the regulation, clarity on what you can actually do, what the impact different regulatory frameworks will have on your services, and bringing together, what are the rules? How will these services actually work? The procedures around it. How will they be embedded in existing other services? Connected to other legacy services, building on a more traditional technology. These are the issues really that seems to be the sort of stumbling blocks that you run into. It's not so much technology, it's developing very fast, and you have sort of red flags being flagged, like GDPR that we have in Europe, and how that is compatible and so on. And there was a lot of discussion around it. There still is a little bit, but you can see how fast you develop mechanisms to work with that and find solutions to such issues. So it's really much more getting the people together and talk together across these different organizations, because blockchain is such a technology that can work so well across boundaries and organizations, that it's natural that you get all these players together, and to get them to work together and organize around the possibilities the technology offers. I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's actually quite fascinating to deploy this decentralized technology where there is not one entity that really governs all of that. And it kind of mirrors, I think, also European Union, right? So you have 27 countries that are somehow need to somehow agree on things. But what about Caroline? What about you guys at OECD? I mean, you even have more countries than what we have here in Europe. What are some of your challenges? Do you relate to what Helen said, or do you have some additional?
No, absolutely, very much. And I think the one thing I've learned over the last few years in particular is kind of early and often has become my mantra, the kind of the importance of speaking to people about new initiatives, about new proposals, whether that be, things that we're trying to do at the OECD level, things that countries are trying to do within their jurisdictions, but having those conversations with kind of all your stakeholders as early as possible to get the kind of full variety of views, to hear all the different perspectives and have them inputting, so that, I mean, because what we discover, of course, is the reality is you're going to hear those views at some point, and it's really kind of most efficient, and you get, I think, a better outcome if you're hearing them fairly early in the process, and you can start to kind of incorporate those different perspectives into whatever it is that you're developing. I mean, we often say, of course, that blockchain is a team sport, and I think that kind of mentality is part of kind of not just the the protocols, the networks, and so forth, but very much in terms of how we create the policy that is trying to strike that balance between supporting innovation and kind of allowing these things to move forward, things which are actually really, really different, and therefore kind of pose quite a challenge to traditional ways of doing business or traditional business models, and allowing those to grow, but not throwing out kind of the baby with the bathwater, in the sense that we need to have the safeguards of the things that our societies that we live in have said are important to us, whether that be things like financial consumer protection, or is that things to do, things that we've learned from the kind of the age of the internet, in terms of, questions around data protection or data portability, the ability to take my own data. People think of it as their own data, and then they kind of dig into the terms and conditions, and they realize, actually I gave away my right to that data some time ago. And so really thinking about those things that we've learned as being important to us in the kind of digital era, and trying to get those embedded in the culture. And because it's not just a question of kind of laws and rules. We've really seen with distributed, and particularly the more decentralized versions of the technology, just putting a law in place isn't enough to achieve the goals. You really need to kind of create the social norms that encourage people to move in a particular direction. And I think trying to embed some of the learnings that we have from our kind of first foray into the digital world, I think is really, really important, given we are still at an early stage of the technology. And I think if we can do that, we will avoid some of the challenge that we see now with kind of the ways that the internet works, and try to overcome that in what we're designing now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Maria, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that, and say I absolutely agree. I think it's really, we talk a lot, in the work we do, we talk a lot about context. What's the context, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and what's the context in which you're solving it, and what are the cultural norms. There's also the context of the internet as a general matter. And to Caroline's point, like what we've learned about data management, about privacy, about how we regulate and don't regulate, and what that results in. We have this weighty history of the internet, and that is a really important part of the context in which the blockchain ecosystem is thriving. So I absolutely agree with everything Caroline said. I think it's so important to consider, how are we not just learning from maybe missteps or unintended consequences of what came before, and that's particularly true, I think, in some of the regulation, but also, how are we recognizing the vast differences? So even though everything sits on this kind of foundation of the internet, this is a way of re-engaging with the internet in a more democratic, fashion. And so what does that mean for us? And how are we remaining true to the spirit of it's called the original internet days, but also really catapulting an entirely new ecosystem into creation. So I think it's context that is often not talked about outside of the Web 3.0 content, sort of discussions. It really comes up maybe more in the file sharing and these kinds of things, as opposed to in the crypto ecosystem, but it's relevant across every single application space in this entire ecosystem. Something I think we would be well served to pay a lot more attention to.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to welcome also Eva Kiley. Thank you so much. We've had some technical difficulties, but we're very happy to have you with us. Maybe you can give us a little bit of perspective coming from, what's going on in the European Parliament. What are you guys looking at these days? What are you working on?
First of all, Maria, thank you so much for inviting me, for having me, and organizing this event. Always you're covering actually every aspect for blockchain in Europe. And today you have excellent speakers and friends that have helped me a lot actually to draft the first blockchain resolution. And now with my work on DLT and the MiCA files of the Econ Committee that's ongoing in the European Parliament. Following their work has been extremely useful to me, not just Sheila, but also Laura. So I have been following your work, and it's been helping me, because this is the year that the European Parliament is following up on what we did in our last mandate, when we started by having a positive approach to the blockchain as a technology, as an infrastructure technology. Now we are trying, since it's actually a more mature technology, it's not the young disruptor that was basically concerning everybody, and everybody was defensive. I would say now everybody's embracing it, and the institutional players, even the banks, they are considering ways to benefit from this technology. And also we have seen its shortcomings, but also its great potential. The two files that I've been working on is MiCA and DLT. DLT, I'm the rapporteur for S&D, and we are trying to create a pilot regime. I would call it sandbox, although they don't like the word sandbox, to test the way we're gonna prepare the legal framework that would cover this hybrid technology, I would say, that doesn't fit into all boxes. So we try to create new boxes for the different tokens and the different uses, and we will see, hopefully less than 5 years, as is initially mentioned, we will see if it's allowing innovation to take place, or if we are facing new problems, and we will change that, hopefully, to create a harmonized environment in Europe. Because as long as we are speaking, member states, not all of them, but some member states, they have been presenting their own strategies. So in order to avoid having these like 27 different member states friction, we try to have an environment where harmonization would be the case, and that we will manage to have a technology that it would not have extra problems of legal uncertainty inside Europe. We already have like a global economy that we have a different approach, and now US, hopefully it's gonna change also its very defensive approach into a more positive one. And we will manage with efforts like SEILAS and WEF, but also OECD, to create a toolbox or maybe a sandbox for this technology to flourish and allow innovation to happen. I have the feeling also with the MiCA, we will cover not just the stable coins, but also DeFi, so decentralization. We will see, because trust me, it's a technology that now we are more familiar with, also more of my colleagues, but I would say still it's not very easy because it's too technical sometimes. So at least we will manage to set like principles and rules that would not stifle innovation, but would create the legal certainty to do so. At the same time, we have the European Blockchain Forum. We have a national initiative that will take all national initiatives and put them in the same forum in order to, as I said, harmonize the environment. And we have INATVA, so we have our interface with the private sector to understand the challenges that they also face in order to not have to go back and change legislation, but to get it right in the first place. As you know, we have established special funding for blockchain applications, and we had some awards, so initiatives to see how blockchain can be used for social good, for new solutions in different fields. I believe we will continue with like that, because now 20% of the budget for Next Generation EU is concerning digitalization, the digital economy, and blockchain is a huge part of it. And of course, where it's the convergence of blockchain and AI, I think it's going to be revolutionary. And I don't want to take more of the time, but I would say that we are trying also to give more capacity, more possibilities to ESMA to coordinate, so to have a European coordination. And these are things that are happening actually the same time that we're concluding the digital single market in Europe. So blockchain will be in parallel with our data strategy and AI strategy, one of the main fields that we are trying to lift all the barriers we have. Thank you so much, Maria.
No, thank you, Eva. Thank you. It's a really great contribution, and I'm really glad that you're able to join us in this dream team. I called you ladies my dream team today, or part of it, because there are many other various women that are very accomplished, but you guys are some of our top in this space. So what I find interesting, the combination of these different technologies is absolutely the key. I think, we shouldn't look at them separately, blockchain here, AI there, data there, and, who knows what else is going to come, IoT coming from around the corner, but we should look at them all together. What I'm kind of wondering is we're now looking at these MiCA, for example, these regulations in Europe. How fast do you think, so once they're approved, and let's say we find out that something is not not completely fitting as it should, because these are new things, technology and applications are developing super fast. So what would be a way to, how do we ensure that we're not stifling technology and innovation? What's the best way to have this dialogue, right? Now, I'm looking at that from in industry, from blockchain, AI, a company that's developing these applications. So let's say we come across something and it's not quite working out. What do we do?
Okay, so you're asking me, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as I said, what we really need now, and I think we're a bit late, but we are struggling, and with the European Commission, I think we have the same need and approach to provide legal certainty to the innovative sector of blockchain, in order to see how these applications can provide us with solutions in problems that exist. So I come back and forth all the time to Christine Lagarde, and now asking why we have these extreme hidden fees in our transactions, and how we can reduce that, since technologies exist to avoid these fees. And usually they try to outsource the problem. It's the national banks, it's their decision. So we have a great opportunity to use this technology in several ways. I wouldn't say replace everything, and I would say that we would have like a global currency or like a decentralized currency, but definitely we could have options. So I think the steps would be first to have clear definitions. This is something we're lacking of, and I think this would be really helpful to decide our approaches. And I would say we have to be flexible into having more approaches, because if you use it for different things, then it would be, I would say, it wouldn't be helpful to try to fit everything in one box, because in the end, this would mean that we block the innovation and the entrepreneurs, and we are not being business neutral. So we are actually benefiting the old traditional system by not allowing innovation to happen. And we need also to have tech neutrality, so we don't need to decide everything. We need to allow the technology have different possibilities. So I would say we definitely need to have uniform rules for crypto asset service providers and issuers at the European level. We definitely need to expand our scope and look what's happening worldwide, in order to avoid sending away everybody who came here because we had a positive approach. So to make sure that we will keep our entrepreneurs here, and actually we would attract more talent to come to Europe. And I think we have to replace existing national frameworks that are applicable to crypto assets, and they are not covered by the existing EU financial services legislation. And this is quite a lot, because this is a new technology. As I said, there are hybrid ways to solve problems, and they have not been addressed with the existing regulation. And finally, I think we need to have also rules for stable coins, also when they are e-money. So we should not just stick to one aspect of what crypto assets could be, but we need to have different frameworks for the different uses and the different blockchains, and the different crypto assets, of course. So I think discussing with you and understanding what are the concerns out there for what Europe would do, I think it's really essential to us. And in our mind, we always want to help to help citizens to ensure that they have access to innovative and safe assets, and also to protect investors, because we saw that when there are blurry rules, then you cannot protect the investors and themselves. They also need the legal certainty, and you cannot protect citizens to have access to the benefits of this technology. So I would say that the regulatory and financial risk that comes with all these new technologies should be covered by EU. In EU, whoever uses new technologies, they feel that we have made sure that they are safe and trustworthy. So we need to achieve that. And since there are no barriers in this digital world, in this digital era, I think we have to make sure that at least people will be informed of the possibilities and of the legal jurisdiction, what applies, what are the rights and not. And of course, to have a clear understanding of what's happening beyond EU. So I hope that there will be less fragmentation rather than more. I see that Germany and Austria, for example, maybe they have a different approach because they already built their own national strategies. But in the end, as I said, I think we need to open up space for the new players and not protect the old players in the financial sector. So this would be the approach that I would have. But we're just like starting basically to work on the file. So I think by next month, we're going to have a clear understanding. And after 21, I think we're going to have a couple of years until the implementation for the crypto assets for the NICA file and the conclusion also of the trilogues. And for DLT, the same. And we will try to have a review of ESMA in less than 5 years. I think it's too long. The technology changes. Hopefully in 2-3 years, we will manage to have a review and then decide what part of this should remain as a European harmonized like regulation and what should change.
Eva, I love listening to you talk about all of this, and I have for years, in part because you take such a thoughtful and nuanced approach to this, right? And I think it's your fundamental question you're asking, I think, is really the most important one, which is who are we trying to protect via any kind of regulation or any kind of law? Is it that we're trying to preserve and protect maybe an incumbent system? And sometimes I'm not positing this is good or bad. I'm just saying these are the questions that need to be asked, right? Is it that we're trying to protect a class we define as consumers, which is a very different group here, right? And I think that's all, it's all just incredibly important to consider what is the context of the regulation that you're trying to put forward. And so I think here, again, there's a lot we can learn from the history of the internet regulation. So in the early days, there was this, the immediate first thing that happens is an analogy. Okay, so is it a utility? Is it like a telephone system? Is it more like energy? Is it more, and there's this like attempt, and this is what I think we saw, a few years back, right? Like everyone trying to be like, well, what is it more like? And is it a commodity? Is it security? Is it this? Is that, trying to figure this out. Then there comes the moment of reckoning and realization, like, okay, some aspects of this maybe are somewhat similar to things that came before, but an awful lot of it is very unique and different, and we should be very careful not to stifle that new and different and exciting thing, especially because it has potential to solve X problem, whatever that problem is that we as a regulator are focused on, which is going to vary widely depending on jurisdiction and orientation and politics and all kinds of other things, right? The economy. And so what I've loved observing over the past few years is that transition, which I think Europe and I think the EP was like really ahead of this in many ways, but has been reflected, all around the world. And so you are generally seeing this understanding that there's more transparency. And so where the regulations orientation is to protect incumbents, there's a little more honesty about that now, or more recognition, like that is actually what we are deciding in our jurisdiction, whatever that jurisdiction is the priority. Right? As opposed to kind of flailing around a little bit and not really knowing. And I found that kind of clarity to be very positive. There's this in general, back in, 2016 or 17, when I was giving talks on regulation and kind of to builders in the space and trying to say, don't be afraid of regulation. It can be your friends, like stop freaking out. This shouldn't be the Wild West. I had this slide I would show of a snowboard pipe, right? And this was like ironic because that was back when like the Lambo snowboarding, culture was sort of like memed. The memes were all around that. And I would say, look, you have, if you look at the Olympics, for example, you've got a half pipe, everyone goes down it. You can do whatever tricks you want going down the pipe, but it's the same pipe for everybody, right? Like everyone has the same fundamental architecture, kind of regulatory architecture that they're engaging with. And the question is, what is the shape of that pipe? What is the curvature, if you will, right? And so what I found fascinating is how in the early days, I actually saw a lot more fragmentation in how this was being approached, with some jurisdictions, being like, embrace, embrace, embrace. We want to be like the innovator jurisdiction. We want to attract all of the, the business or all the builders, and some being like, no way. We want to be late adopters, or we want to kill this thing dead. Like, we don't want this coming here. We see no interest. We think it's dangerous. It's criminals, whatever it is. And I feel like there's been much more harmonization happening globally over the course of the past few years, in part because the technology, to points others have made, has started to mature. So it's great to hear that that Europe is continuing to pay attention to what's happening in other places. That's no surprise, of course. But I think that there's less distinction now than there was in the past. And that's in part because of the work that groups like everyone on this call have been doing to try to get those conversations going, to try to affect some of that reconciliation and harmonization of approach.
If I may add one thing, exactly because of what you said, we need to make sure also we have a global consensus in the taxonomy of it, the taxation, and definitely we need to have more innovation in supervision of what's happening. So we also need maybe investors to trust the European markets, and this is not the case yet. So I think we can, if we can ensure that there will be no wrongdoing in the EU, then we can actually see more things taking place here. And I'm not going into the details of like shares, bonds with the volume or the thresholds that we have to address, because this is an ongoing discussion now in our files. But I think we're gonna have some like concrete measures to start, let's say, addressing the challenges that the investors and the technology is facing. Also the scope, because we can have it very narrow, we can have it very specific or more wide. But as I said before, since I know most of you and I can have your input, I hope we will manage to get it right, and we're gonna have the right content in this legislation to achieve what we all expect from these files in Europe.
Caroline, did you want to add something?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, this question of kind of the importance of kind of having lots of different perspective and kind of shaping the ecosystem regulation, I think kind of brings us to, given it being, International Women's Days, is this question of sort of diversity in the sector. And I guess, how do we ensure that lots of different perspectives in terms of, backgrounds, whether it be engineers or, policymakers, politicians, the general public and so forth, how are those different perspectives heard? But also, how is, how are women who, I guess, not just historically, but still to this day are kind of underrepresented in tech generally, and specifically in blockchain, how to bring forward those voices more in the sector. And I think, I mean, thinking about this a little bit, I guess there's a couple of different stages. There's kind of getting people involved, getting women involved in the sector. There is, once people are involved, kind of how do they kind of, what's the culture of the environment that they're working in? And then thirdly, how do people move up through the ecosystem? And I think some of the solutions are kind of at the individual level, like things that either people already in the sector or people wanting to get into the sector can do. But some of them are also systemic as well. And I think kind of thinking about what those different things are is really important in terms of making sure that when we build, and we hear this a lot, it's kind of big discussions right now about vaccines and who were they tested on, what were the profile, did we have kind of full diversity in making sure the vaccines were really safe for everybody, or were they just safe for people who fit a particular profile? And the same is true. I mean, that's just a micro example. The same is true across the board, and it's very much true in this sector as well. So I think maybe thinking a little bit about what can we do in terms of attracting people in, retaining people, and then helping promote a diversity of people in the sector is quite important.
Thank you. And that was one of the reasons why we also set up this webinar today, to really raise these questions or invite more women into this discussion. And I would very much, like to see that happening in Europe and of course outside of Europe, because when we just look around, I mean, it has improved quite considerably. So I started about 3 years ago, so I'm, I think, the newest here. But even since then, I can see, many more women, girls, women, more experienced women are really getting involved, are starting to learn. But what else can we do? How do we explain that this is really, blockchain isn't about coding? Just like car isn't about its engine, it's about where the car takes you. That's the interesting part. That's same thing with blockchain. It's about the opportunities, the innovation, the new business models, or that can influence healthcare, social areas, so many aspects of our lives. It's not a cure for everything, but it's going to touch many aspects of our lives. So how can we explain this to get more women on board to help in these discussions? Any suggestions?
I think that since the technology is so incredibly ubiquitous, I mean, it is really mapping towards organizations, sort of self-organized, perhaps also decentralized organizations, which is really the future. I think it's such an incredibly exciting space to be in, as a person in general, but as a woman as well. And I think that there are so many skills that are needed here, so many different views that needs to be represented to get it right. I mean, this is again a technology where it's not for it's the technology itself that you have it. It's to solve a problem, and women are pretty good problem solvers, I think, in general, and we can definitely add a lot of value to the different services that we deploy in this technology by getting involved. It will definitely improve the services across. There are different skill sets that are needed. As we say, we have lawyers, we have engineers, we have policymakers, we have project managers, we have anyone needs to be there, because then you get it also diversified enough to have the all the ethical aspects covered, which is so important. I mean, we see the same thing in AI and IoT and other technologies as well, that we would be much better off if we got involved.
I think when we were meeting earlier, we were saying that you actually don't need to be a coder. You really don't need to understand all the technical aspects. It's not about that. I think that was kind of a cool thing to talk about maybe 2-3 years ago, about the consensus and all these things. But now it's much more about the applications, where this is used, who's using it, how is it used, how is it being used, and is it really inclusive? Is it for everybody? And I think, like you mentioned with AI, it's the same thing. We need to make sure that the applications that are being built are really for the whole society. And so that's why we need everybody to contribute to this discussion, to build the applications, but also to build the policies and the regulations, so we don't discriminate, we keep it open. Sheila?
Yeah, well, I expect this audience who's listening to us now, is deeply aware of the importance of women engaging in the space, right? And so I think there's a question like, how do you do that? And so this is where I think, Caroline, some of the things that you noted, I just want to double down on or reflag, which is, how do we create cultures of inclusion and belonging within companies, or within institutions, so that, women are not hired as kind of a box checking exercise, or because, for whatever other reason, right? But then there's no support, there's no growth, there's no mentoring, there's no actual attempt to integrate them into the team, right? And so you see this a lot. Like, one of the big complaints about big tech is that all the women are relegated to marketing communications, right? And that was true for a very long time. So you might have diversity numbers in terms of gender diversity, but they were in one part of the organization. They were and this was true, by the way, back when I worked in finance, right? Like, it was like the women were like in PR, and they were in like these certain kinds of roles. And part of that, I think, is we're seeing more and more like women like, us today who are providing examples of leadership, who are at the top of organizations or very significant people within their institutions who are able to drive, change within the institutions to some degree, depending on the role exactly. And so, these are just really, really critically important questions I think we need to address. And again, I think I'm going to go back to kind of what's emerging as a theme is like we can learn a lot from tech, right? From tech as a general culture and environment, because it's still relatively new. It was very, very male dominated for a very long time. It remains still that there's all kinds of, documented discrimination on different axes, but certainly on a gender axis within some of these companies. There have been major attempts to correct that, whether it's through addressing pay inequity, mentoring programs, employee resource groups, or ERGs, as they're called in the United States, like things like this. But we have a chance to really do better, so to really kind of not start from scratch, look at some of these things that have happened, across different sectors and bring that learning into the blockchain ecosystem, which I think is just really, really, really important. So one thing I want to say is, and I'm not in any way, by the way, sneezing at marketing communications. Communications is a gigantic part of my job, right? So be very clear about that. I think those roles are critically important, particularly with a complicated technology like this, where there's hardly anyone who can speak about it comprehensively, right? So I think it's really important. But I also think, there's room across the house for women, and we know that this is the case. So I would say to anyone watching this who's like, how do I get into this, into this field? Don't be intimidated, right? Like you can actually teach yourself to code. If that's something that interests you and engages you, you can, there are resources available to you if that's the direction that you want to take your career. Caroline and I are both lawyers by training, so there's now like huge, like every law school that I know of now has a blockchain law, class or even like a field of study or whatever it is, right? So it's a matter of just kind of seeking out some of these resources and recognizing that we are in a very different place than we were 5 years ago in terms of access to education, access to women in the space. There's so many different women in blockchain, groups and chats on every single messaging, app. There's like a women in blockchain group, right? So there's so much of this that's happening, meetups, but I would say, don't be intimidated, don't be afraid to kind of jump into this. And I'll just tell a kind of personal story. Like I got into this totally randomly. I'm not a computer scientist, I'm a lawyer. I was general counsel of an organization. I was focusing on this data issue where we were really trying to figure out like how do we engage and create more security around a very sensitive amount of data for civil organizations in different parts of the world, and how do we make sure that we are providing like the most secure experience for some of these nonprofit organizations, the very existence of which could have resulted in death to the founders, right? And so I came into blockchain from that perspective, thinking about the things I always cared about: vulnerable populations, protection, security, like the law. Like this was my entry point into this space. It wasn't like I suddenly like everything I've ever done is like over here, and now it was a very natural progression and flow. And the beautiful thing about this technology that I think you've heard all of my colleagues here say today is it is universally applicable. There really isn't, a space that doesn't have some hook or connection into the blockchain ecosystem at this point. So it's a matter of like, don't think you have to do something crazy radical, make some gigantic, transition. It's probably just a natural extension of what also already interests you and where your passion already lies. So I just think that's I try to land that message whenever I can, especially to younger people, because I think it's easy to be very intimidated by the amount of media attention this space gets, the amount of money that's in this space, the caliber of people that that are in this space. But everyone starts somewhere, and you have a starting place too.
Excellent, thank you so much, Caroline. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, look, those are great points, and I think it's kind of very encouraging message. I think everybody's road into the industry is a little bit different, but it certainly wasn't something that I foresaw for myself, even 5 years ago. But the nice thing about it is there are lots and lots of different angles from which you can kind of tackle the opportunities and issues that the DLT raises. So, you know, really just to affirm Sheila's message, there is a place for you if you are interested in finding a place in this sector. I think, look, I mean, I think there are some, you know, things you can do as an individual, and Sheila has picked up on some of those in terms of kind of just the sheer number of resources. And you know, a lot of these things we're going to mention now, I think, are not perhaps even specific to DLT. Maybe they're specific to tech, but you know, there is a lot of commonality with other kind of, you know, technology types. You know, whether it be in terms of wanting to kind of make sure that you're well informed or kind of build up your skill set, there are a lot of resources there, things you can do at the individual level. And then there are, of course, things that I think at the kind of that more systemic level, things like, and you know, this is something that we've seen. I know it's something that the OECD does, it's something that the WEF does in terms of, you know, things like not allowing participation in panels or not allowing the organization of events where you don't have, you know, ideally, you know, a kind of 50-50 gender balance, or, you know, at least one woman represented in the discussion. And it's really not just a token thing. It is just so important that those considerations are taken into account. And it might be an event, or it might be a panel, it might be writing a report, but making sure that you have those diversity views, you know, or even, you know, it's things like shortlists for roles. You know, do you have women represented on those? And in some places, those things are, you know, they might be in the rule book, for example, but kind of really being consistent to make sure that, you know, are those things actually being followed? Are those kind of considerations being taken into account? I think kind of if we're already in this industry, can really be quite vigilant in making sure that those considerations really are taken into account. And that's, you know, that's gender, but it's also kind of broader diversity concerns. And it's very much in all of our interests to make sure that I think that does happen. You know, and then I think Sheila spoke a little bit about some of the kind of the cultural issues. So once you're into a team, like how do you make the team, you know, it's not enough to have kind of one woman or a few women sitting at the table, but how do you change the culture that it really allows them to kind of bring their perspectives to the table and have that make a meaningful impact on what it is that's being developed. And then kind of at that very initial kind of getting into the industry stage. Again, you know, there are some things that can be done there in terms of kind of, you know, gender and diversity in terms of shortlisting for roles, but also just this broader point that, you know, no matter kind of what your background, your age, and you know, kind of, or work, you know, kind of work status, you know, there is a place for you in this sector. And I think kind of helping understand that, you know, reaching out, the importance of network and reaching out to people who are already in the sector, who are often very, very willing to help. But you know, kind of at the individual level, you do need to put your hand up as well. So there is that balance of kind of, as I said, individual issues, systemic issues that I think we all need to be kind of keeping an eye on.
Yeah, no, excellent. Absolutely.
Just one thing I want to add, right, which is, of course, the role of men here, right? So I think it's really, really important that that we look to men as allies, you know, who are really promoting, supporting, amplifying the voices of women. And so, you know, one thing that I think is probably not known is, I've always said this before, the very first time I spoke on blockchain technology in a public space was because a friend of mine was on a panel that had become a manel. It was all male. And he said, I will not speak on a panel that's all men. I refuse to do that. And so he put out on Twitter or something, I don't quite remember where, you know, I'm declining this panel and I want to replace myself with a women panelist. And is anyone available at, you know, like tomorrow or whatever, right? And a bunch of people tagged me. And this was, I mean, I'd done no public speaking on this. It was very much in the charitable sector. It was kind of like relegated to this one domain. And I was like, sure, okay, why not, you know? And that was the first time I spoke on blockchain in public. It was an opportunity given to me by a male colleague. Not even a colleague of mine, like someone in the ecosystem who I was acquainted with. And it was his saying, like, this is not acceptable. You can't possibly tell me that there is not a qualified woman to sit on this panel, and I'm going to go and prove you wrong and find them. And so that kind of action is extraordinarily powerful, you know, and it's something at the forum, and we've had a policy for quite a while. We don't have panels that are all men. Like, it's just, we just have a policy against it. We do not do that. And that is something I think that has taken root in various sectors all across, you know, across the space, beyond even blockchain. But it's something that is a really concrete way that some of the male leaders in the space can really help and support.
And I think it's a really good point, because I mean, the number of times I am still shocked to see all male panels or all male events, even not even just one panel, but every single panel in a whole event. And it really is just so important that is not presented as the face of the sector. We are doing such a disservice to what the sector could become if it has a very, very narrow view of kind of one perspective that is going to shape it. And it's very, very kind of short-termist, I think, thinking to kind of not go beyond. And the ways to address it are relatively simple. So I think, keeping it on people's radar, calling out people, like, not even in a negative way, but just to say, like, I noticed you've got this lineup of speakers and they're all men. Here are some names of women who could make a really strong contribution to the discussion.
If I may add something, Maria, I see in any case, because I agree with Sheila, it has been a dominated place, fintech especially, by men, and suddenly with blockchain it hasn't. Maybe initially, I mean, the people who started working on Bitcoin especially, but as you see, I initiated the blockchain resolution. I'm a woman, and then we have Helen from the commission, super active on like we meet several times, and we have Caroline and Sheila that they have started this amazing initiative in their own organizations that are actually global. And Maria, of course, in artificial intelligence that we have been dealing with now recently, like 1 year now, it has been like the top of our agenda, but it has been there, of course. I see my colleagues in the European Parliament, mainly women, taking the files of the legislation, of the studies, of proposals, of amendments in events. And it's not because they're women. It was a new technology, and it was not dominated yet. So I see more women finding like room to excel and to be involved. And I also agree that you don't need to be a computer scientist, because by design, blockchain and AI is, I would say, politics, but I would say it definitely needs to have aspects of a legal understanding of the challenges there, understanding of the economy, and to design it in a way that it will be scalable, interoperable, for example, in blockchain and AI, the metrics that choose to not include like biases or like not to lead to discrimination. So this is like also the philosophy of the technology needs people that can understand the impact it might have. So I would say we are in a critical position now that we can open the road and we can support more women to enter. And I've also been in an event recently, I would say a month ago, that was like just men, and they told me, listen, we had difficult times to find women. And I said, okay, ask me. I have like, I can give you so many women that you would not have enough events to listen to them. We have Elizabeth, Laura, Sin, we have like friends that they have been awesome into developing really amazing blockchain solutions while nobody knew exactly what blockchain was. So I would say we don't need to have these excuses anymore. We just need to keep going like we do. And Maria, I think we should do more things on like blockchain and AI too in the future.
Absolutely. I thank you very much. No, this was a wonderful ending. If I may say, I think we're running out of time, but I'm very happy, Eva, that you said that there are women, in the parliament as well that are taking up and taking initiative and going after these technological files, but they're really influencing our lives. So it's not influencing the technology; it's really shaping our future for years to come. So I'm super happy to hear that, and I know that Helen is supporting that as well. So that's fantastic. And we're actually, as part of Blockchain for Europe, we're also organizing workshops. So if there is any more need for support, we're happy to help out, to really help to educate about the various aspects of the technology, to show the different use cases. I think this is super important as well, because now we're in a stage where we can actually show use cases, different companies in how that relates to citizens, how can people use that technology. So we're happy to do that. And I believe that with all your support, ladies, It's just going to be, you know, we're just going to go day by day and get more involved, more people involved, more women involved, more men to support us, because I understand that's crucial as well. And we will all just have a, you know, bigger diversity and really inclusion to help us all to bring this technology to life. So with this, I would like to thank you all very much, my dream team, and so great to see you and so great to have you. And I look forward to having more of these discussions. This is on International Women's Day, but we should do this more often. So I aim to do that, you know, a few times during the year. So I'm sure we will be seeing you. I hope we will be seeing you again at some point.
Look forward to it. Thanks a lot,
Thank you so
Maria.
much, Maria.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
Lynn.
great day. Thanks. Bye.